The crack of gunfire echoed across the vast prairie as Hannah Clarke watched in horror while 5 masked outlaws surrounded the Hastings-bound wagon train. She barely had time to scream before rough hands yanked her from the buckboard where she'd been riding with her elderly aunt, now sprawled motionless on the ground. Wyoming Territory, 1875. Keep quiet if you want to live, lady. A gravelly voice hissed in Hannah's ear as she was thrown over a saddle like a sack of grain. Her fingers clutched desperately at the coarse leather while she struggled to breathe through the dust and terror. It happened so quickly. One moment, the 15-wagon caravan had been peacefully making its way toward the promise of new beginnings in Colorado Territory. The next, chaos erupted as the bandits struck from the rocky outcropping where they'd been lying in wait. The wagon master and 2 other men had been gunned down immediately, their bodies crumpling to the ground before anyone could react. Hannah's aunt, Matilda, had reached for the small derringer hidden in her reticule when a bullet caught her in the chest. The last Hannah saw of her only living relative was her pale face against the blood-soaked fabric of her traveling dress. "Ride," shouted the outlaw leader, a tall man with a ragged scar running down his cheek beneath his bandana. "We got what we came for." Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs as the outlaw gang thundered away from the devastated wagon train, her body bouncing painfully against the horse with each galloping stride. Tears streamed down her face, cutting clean trails through the dust coating her skin. Her thoughts were a jumble of panic and grief, but one clear realization emerged: no one would come for her. No one even knew where to look. Miles away, Hank Everett leaned against the bar in Platteville's only saloon, nursing a whiskey as he tried to ignore the boisterous poker game in the corner. At 32, his lean frame carried the strength of a man who'd spent his life in the saddle, while his eyes held the watchfulness of someone who'd learned the hard way to stay alert. The sun-weathered lines around those eyes deepened as he listened to the conversation between the barkeep and a breathless young man who'd just burst through the swinging doors. "I tell you, they hit the Hastings train, killed the wagon master and 2 others. Took a woman too." Hank's fingers tightened around his glass. "When?" The young man, barely more than a boy, turned toward him. "Couple hours ago, just past Devil's Backbone Ridge, I was scouting ahead on horseback when I heard the shots, doubled back to see." "The Blackwell gang," the barkeep muttered, shaking his head. "Been getting bolder since the marshal took that bullet last month." "Not Blackwell," the boy corrected. "It was Rollins and his crew, recognized that bay stallion of his even from a distance." Hank set down his glass, a cold certainty settling in his gut. He'd been tracking Jack Rollins for 3 years, ever since the outlaw had murdered Hank's partner during a bank robbery in Cheyenne. The law had never managed to pin anything on Rollins, but Hank knew the truth. "This woman they took," Hank asked quietly. "Young, old?" "Young, I reckon. Couldn't see much, but she had light hair. They threw her over a horse and rode north toward the Laramie foothills." Hank slid a coin across the scratched wooden surface. "Much obliged for the information." Without another word, he pushed away from the bar and headed for the door. "You ain't thinking of going after them, are you?" the barkeep called. "That's Rollins and his whole gang, 5 of the meanest killers in the territory." Hank didn't bother responding. Minutes later, he led his dappled gray stallion from the livery, a Winchester rifle secured in its scabbard, and his saddlebags loaded with ammunition and provisions. "You're a fool if you're planning what I think," said old Sam, the stable master. "One man against Rollins' gang. Might as well put a bullet in your own head and save them the trouble." "Maybe," Hank replied, tightening the cinch on his saddle, "but someone's got to do something." "Why you ain't the law," Hank's expression hardened. "I've got my reasons." He swung into the saddle, adjusting his hat against the late afternoon sun. "If I'm not back in a week, my gear goes to you and my money's in the bank for my sister in Denver." Before Sam could protest further, Hank urged his horse into a trot, heading north out of town. He had a long ride ahead of him, and every minute counted. The Rollins gang was notorious for many things, none of them gentle. His jaw tightened at the thought of what might befall the woman they'd taken. The outlaws had several hours' head start, but Hank had one advantage: he knew these hills better than most. He'd spent the past 5 years working as a scout and sometimes bounty hunter throughout the territory. If Rollins was heading for his usual hideout in the foothills, Hank could cut across Cedar Pass and intercept them before they reached it. Night fell swiftly on the prairie, but the full moon provided enough light to keep moving at a steady pace. Hank stopped only briefly to rest his horse and check his bearings. By midnight, he was climbing the rocky slope toward Cedar Pass, his mind focused on the task ahead. 1 man against 5 was suicide by any measure, but surprise and strategy might even the odds enough to give him a fighting chance. Hannah's world had narrowed to a haze of pain and fear. The outlaws had ridden hard for hours before finally stopping in a narrow canyon. When they roughly pulled her from the horse, her legs buckled beneath her, numb from being draped across the saddle for so long. A tall outlaw with a jagged scar, the one the others called Rollins, yanked her upright. "Get some water in her," he ordered a younger man with ginger hair peeking out from under his hat. "Can't have our prize dying on us before we decide what to do with her." The redhead thrust a canteen at Hannah. "Drink." Her hands trembled so badly she could barely hold it, but the first sip of tepid water awakened a desperate thirst. She gulped greedily until the man pulled it away. "That's enough. Food's coming later if you behave." "Please," Hannah whispered, finding her voice for the first time since her capture. "What do you want with me? My family has no money for ransom." Rollins laughed, the sound devoid of any warmth. "Ransom? Lady, do you know how far we are from anything resembling civilization?" "No, you're just insurance against pursuit, and maybe entertainment for the boys later." The leering grins from the other men made Hannah's blood run cold. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to appear smaller, less noticeable. "Shouldn't we keep moving, Jack?" asked a heavyset outlaw with a scraggly beard. "That wagon train might have had scouts who survived." "We'll rest the horses for a couple hours," Rollins decided. "No one's fool enough to follow us out here, especially at night. By dawn, we'll be at the hideout and no one will find us there." Hannah stared at the rocky ground, mind racing. Her mother had taught her that, in desperate times, clear thinking was more valuable than panic. She needed to assess her situation, find any advantage. 5 men, all armed, no settlements nearby. She was deep in unfamiliar territory with no weapon, no horse, and no clear plan. One of the men bound her wrists with rough rope, then tied her to a stunted pine tree at the edge of their small camp. The men built a fire and passed around a bottle of whiskey while cooking salt pork in a small skillet. The smell made Hannah's empty stomach clench painfully, but no one offered her any food. As the outlaws grew more intoxicated, their conversation turned increasingly crude. Hannah pressed herself against the tree trunk, trying to become invisible. Her gaze drifted upward to the vast field of stars overhead. Somewhere beneath the same sky, people were living normal lives, unaware of her plight. Would anyone even search for her? Or would she simply vanish, another victim of the lawless frontier? A chill that had nothing to do with the night air settled deep in her bones. Hank reached the overlook above the narrow canyon well after midnight. Below, a small campfire flickered, illuminating the figures of men moving around it. He counted 5 distinct shadows. Using his field glass, he confirmed what he'd suspected: Rollins and his gang were taking a rest before the final push to their hideout. His gaze shifted, searching for their captive. There, a slender figure tied to a tree at the periphery of the firelight. Even from this distance, Hank could see she was awake, her posture tense with fear. Settling behind a large boulder, Hank assessed his options. A frontal assault would be suicide. Even with the element of surprise, he couldn't hope to take down 5 armed men in a direct confrontation. He needed to divide them, reduce the odds. Patience had always been his strongest virtue as a hunter. Hank settled in to watch, waiting for the outlaw's guard to drop. After about an hour, 2 of the men rolled into their bedrolls while 2 others took watch. Rollins himself remained by the fire, drinking from a bottle and occasionally glancing toward the woman. Hank's jaw tightened. He knew Rollins' reputation with women. The outlaw wouldn't wait much longer before deciding to entertain himself with their captive. Making his decision, Hank moved silently back to where he'd left his horse secured. He retrieved a small bundle of dynamite from his saddlebag, a tool he occasionally used for clearing rock falls during his scouting work. It wasn't much, just 2 sticks wired together with a short fuse, but it would create the diversion he needed. Working his way along the ridge, Hank positioned himself about a quarter-mile from the camp, near a loose scree slope. He nestled the dynamite into a crevice, lit the fuse, and retreated quickly. The explosion that followed sent rocks cascading down the slope with a thunderous rumble that echoed through the canyon. Back at the camp, the outlaws reacted exactly as he'd hoped. Rollins leapt to his feet, shouting orders. "Colton, Brett, check it out." The 2 men who'd been standing watch grabbed their rifles and headed toward the disturbance. Could be a rock slide, could be lawmen. Either way, I want to know. Hank circled back quickly, approaching the camp from the opposite direction. 3 outlaws remained: Rollins, the redhead, and one who appeared to be sleeping through the commotion. The woman was fully alert now, straining against her bonds as she watched the chaos unfold. Drawing his Colt, Hank took careful aim at the redhead, who had moved to the edge of the camp away from the firelight. The shot rang out and the man dropped without a sound, the bullet finding its mark just below his ear. "Ambush," Rollins bellowed, diving for cover behind a large rock. The 3rd outlaw finally woke, fumbling for his gun. Hank's second shot caught him in the shoulder, sending him sprawling backward with a howl of pain. "Show yourself," Rollins shouted into the darkness. "You're dead, whoever you are." Hank didn't respond, instead moving silently to a new position. The woman was fully visible in the firelight, a perfect target if Rollins decided to use her as leverage. He needed to draw the outlaw's attention away from her. Picking up a stone, Hank tossed it against a boulder to his right. The small clatter was enough. Rollins fired twice in that direction, the muzzle flashes briefly illuminating his position. It was all Hank needed. His next shot struck the rock inches from Rollins' head, sending sharp fragments into the outlaw's face. Rollins cursed viciously, momentarily blinded. Hank seized the opportunity, darting forward to where the woman was tied. Her blue eyes widened in shock as he appeared beside her, knife already slicing through her bonds. "Can you run?" he whispered. She nodded shakily, rubbing her wrists. "Then run, that way." He pointed toward a narrow gap between 2 boulders. "I'll be right behind you." Hannah didn't need to be told twice. As soon as her hands were free, she bolted for the gap Hank had indicated. Behind her, she heard more gunfire, followed by angry shouts. Her heart threatened to burst from her chest as she squeezed between the boulders and found herself in a narrow ravine. She hesitated, unsure which way to go in the darkness. Moments later, the stranger appeared beside her, gripping her elbow to guide her. "This way, watch your step." They scrambled up the ravine, away from the camp. Hannah's city-bred legs protested the steep climb, but fear gave her strength she didn't know she possessed. Twice she stumbled, and each time the man's strong hand steadied her. "My horse is just over this ridge," he told her, his voice low and urgent. "We need to reach him before they regroup. The other outlaws, the ones who went to investigate, they'll be searching the area of the explosion. We're going the opposite direction." From below came the sound of pursuit. Rollins, shouting orders to someone. At least one of the wounded outlaws must have recovered enough to join the chase. "Move," her rescuer urged her forward with increased urgency. They crested the ridge, and Hannah saw the silhouette of a horse tethered to a scrub oak. The animal nickered softly as they approached. Without warning, her rescuer lifted her bodily and practically tossed her into the saddle before swinging up behind her. "Hold on," he ordered, reaching around her to grab the reins. The horse leapt forward into a gallop that had Hannah clutching desperately at the saddle horn behind them, a rifle cracked. Her rescuer grunted, his body tensing against her back. "Are you hit?" she gasped. "Just a graze." "Keep your head down." They thundered through the darkness, the horse somehow finding secure footing despite the treacherous terrain. Hannah's terror gradually subsided enough for her to register other sensations: the solid strength of the man behind her, the rhythm of the horse beneath them, the wind whipping her loose hair around her face. "Who are you?" she finally managed to ask. "Name's Hank Everett. I was in Platteville when word came about the wagon train attack. You came after me, alone." The concept seemed impossible. "Why would you risk your life for a stranger?" There was a pause before he answered, his voice tight with what might have been pain from his wound. "Let's just say I've been looking for a reason to confront Rollins for a long time. You gave me one." "My aunt," Hannah's voice broke. "They killed my aunt and the wagon master, others too. I know, I'm sorry." His tone softened slightly. "What's your name, madam?" Hannah Clarke." She swallowed hard. "Where are we going?" "There's an old line shack about 10 miles north of here. Used to belong to the Carson Ranch before they sold out. We can hole up there until it's safe to head back to civilization." "And when will that be?" Hank's answer was grim. "When Rollins and his men are no longer a threat." They rode in silence after that, Hannah too exhausted and overwhelmed to form coherent thoughts. Dawn was breaking by the time they reached a small, dilapidated cabin nestled against a rocky hillside. Hank dismounted first, then helped Hannah down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet touched the ground, muscles screaming from the long ride and earlier ordeal. "Inside," Hank directed, leading his horse to a lean-to at the side of the cabin. "I'll see to Gray here, then join you." The cabin's interior was sparse but intact: a small table with 2 mismatched chairs, a narrow cot against one wall, a stone fireplace, and a few shelves holding dusty tins and jars. Hannah sank onto one of the chairs, suddenly aware of every ache in her body. Her dress was torn and filthy, her hair a tangled mess, and her face felt stiff with dried tears and dust. Hank entered moments later, carrying his saddlebags. In the growing light streaming through the cabin's single window, Hannah got her first clear look at her rescuer. He was taller than she'd realized, with broad shoulders and the lean, hard-muscled build of a man who lived in the saddle. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. But it was his eyes that caught and held her attention, a clear, penetrating green that seemed to see right through her. Those eyes now assessed her with quiet concern. "You're hurt." Hannah glanced down, noticing for the first time the scrapes on her arms and hands. "It's nothing. Just scratches from the bushes and rocks. Still need cleaning." He set down his saddlebags and pulled out a canteen and a small kit. "Let me see to that graze first, then I'll tend to you." He shrugged out of his buckskin jacket, revealing a dark stain on the left sleeve of his shirt. The bullet had torn through the fabric and carved a shallow furrow along his upper arm. "That needs stitches," Hannah said, finding her practical nature asserting itself despite her exhaustion. Hank gave her a measured look. "You know how to sew a wound." "My father was a doctor in St. Louis. I assisted him often before he died." She stood steadier now. "Do you have a needle and thread in that kit?" A hint of surprise flickered across his face. "I do, and whiskey to clean it." "Good. Sit down and let me tend to that before infection sets in." For a moment it seemed he might refuse, but then he nodded and took the chair she'd vacated. Hannah washed her hands with water from the canteen, then opened his medical kit to find a curved needle and catgut thread. The wound wasn't deep, but it was long and ragged. "This will hurt," she warned, uncorking the whiskey. "Not my first bullet wound, madam." She poured the liquor over the gash, and to his credit, Hank didn't flinch, though she saw the muscles in his jaw tighten. With careful, precise movements, Hannah stitched the wound closed, her hands steady despite her exhaustion. "You've got a gentle touch," Hank remarked as she tied off the final stitch. "Most field surgeons I've known aren't half so careful. A neat seam heals better and leaves less scarring." She wrapped a clean bandage around his arm. "You should keep it clean and dry for at least a week." "We may not have a week," Hank said grimly, rolling down his sleeve. "Rollins isn't the type to give up easily." Hannah sat back, suddenly remembering the danger they were still in. "You think he'll track us here?" "He'll try. But I took some precautions, crossed a creek bed, doubled back on our trail. It should buy us some time." He stood, moving to the fireplace. "I need to get a fire going. Nights get cold up here, even in summer." While Hank built a small fire, Hannah used some of the precious water to clean her face and hands. The simple act of washing away the dirt made her feel marginally more human, though the events of the past day still seemed like some terrible nightmare. "Why did they take me?" she asked suddenly. There were other women in the wagon train, some younger than me. Hank paused in his work, not looking at her. Rollins is known for his particular tastes, light-haired women especially. The implication made Hannah's stomach turn. "I see," she straightened her shoulders. "Then I'm doubly grateful for your intervention, Mr. Everett. Just Hank is fine." He got the fire crackling and stood. "You should rest. Take the cot, I'll keep watch." "You need rest too, I'll manage." His tone brooked no argument. "We've got some jerky and hardtack in the saddlebags. Not much of a meal, but it'll keep body and soul together until I can hunt something proper." They shared the meager provisions in silence. Hannah was too exhausted to maintain conversation, and Hank seemed naturally taciturn. After eating, she stretched out on the narrow cot, intending only to rest her eyes for a moment. Instead, she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. When Hannah awoke, golden afternoon light was streaming through the cabin's dusty window. She sat up, momentarily disoriented, before the memories came flooding back: the attack, her captivity, the daring rescue. Hank was nowhere to be seen inside the cabin. Panic fluttered in her chest until she heard movement outside. Rising on unsteady legs, Hannah moved to the window. Hank was at the lean-to, tending to his horse and apparently keeping watch over the surrounding terrain. The set of his shoulders spoke of vigilance, not alarm, which she found reassuring. She used the opportunity to assess her appearance. Her traveling dress was beyond salvation torn, stained and missing several buttons. Her hair had mostly escaped its pins and hung in tangled waves down her back. Hannah did what she could with her fingers, working out the worst knots before rebraiding it into a simple plait. The cabin door opened and Hank entered, carrying a brace of rabbits. "You're awake. Good, got us some dinner." "Thank you." Hannah watched as he set about cleaning the rabbits with efficient movements. "How long was I asleep?" "Most of the day. You needed it." "Have you slept at all?" "I'll catch a few hours after dark." He worked in silence for a few moments before adding, "No sign of pursuit yet, but that doesn't mean they've given up." "How long do you think we'll need to stay here?" Hank considered the question as he spitted the rabbits for roasting. "Depends." Rollins is like a dog with a bone when he feels he's been crossed. But he's also got a price on his head in 3 territories. He can't spend too much time in the open hunting us. There's a price on his head, then he's wanted by the law for murder, robbery, and worse. Hank's expression darkened. But the territories are vast and lawmen are few. Men like Rollins operate with near impunity in these remote areas. "Is that why you came after him? Are you a lawman?" "No." He placed the rabbits over the fire to cook. "Not anymore." The simple statement held volumes of unspoken history, but Hannah sensed it wasn't the time to press for details. Instead, she moved to help with their meal, finding a dented pot on one of the shelves that could be used to boil water for coffee. "Tell me about yourself, Hannah Clarke," Hank said unexpectedly as they worked. "What brings a city doctor's daughter to a wagon train bound for Colorado territory?" Hannah measured coffee grounds into the pot before answering. "My father died 2 years ago, influenza. My mother had passed years earlier, so I went to live with my aunt in Chicago. She decided we should join her brother's family in Denver after her husband died." Her throat tightened. "She was my last living relative, aside from the uncle I've never met. I'm sorry about your aunt." "Thank you." Hannah blinked back tears. She was a remarkable woman, strong-minded, independent. She taught music before her marriage and continued giving lessons afterward. "She's the one who insisted I learn practical skills alongside the ornamental ones expected of young ladies." Sounds like a wise woman. She was. Hannah managed a small smile at the memory. "She scandalized half of Chicago society by teaching me to shoot a derringer, said every woman should know how to protect herself." She wasn't wrong. They lapsed into companionable silence as the rabbits roasted and the coffee brewed. The simple domestic tasks helped calm Hannah's frayed nerves, giving her something normal to focus on amid the chaos her life had become. "What about you?" she finally asked. "You mentioned you were once a lawman." Hank poked at the fire, his expression guarded. "Deputy U.S. Marshall, based out of Cheyenne, for 5 years. What happened? He was silent so long that Hannah thought he wouldn't answer. When he did, his voice was measured, controlled. My partner and I were pursuing a gang that had robbed the Territorial Bank. We split up to cover more ground. I followed the wrong trail. By the time I realized my mistake, my partner had cornered the gang alone. His jaw tightened. They killed him, shot him down in cold blood while he was trying to negotiate their surrender. I'm so sorry. The gang escaped. There wasn't enough evidence to prosecute when they were finally captured months later. The leader walked free on a technicality. Hank met her eyes directly. That leader was Jack Rawlins, understanding dawned. So that's why you came after me alone. It wasn't just about rescuing a stranger. No, it wasn't, he admitted, but that doesn't make the rescue any less valid. I didn't mean to imply I know. His expression softened slightly. Truth is, I've been tracking Rawlins for 3 years, waiting for a chance to bring him to justice. When I heard about the Wagon train attack, it seemed like providence. What will you do with him if you catch him? Take him back to face a judge if possible. Something hard and determined flashed in Hank's eyes. But if he resists, I won't lose any sleep over putting a bullet in him. The frank admission should have disturbed Hannah, but instead she found herself nodding. After witnessing Rawlins' cruelty firsthand and knowing what he'd done to others, she couldn't summon much sympathy for the outlaw. The rabbits proved tender and flavorful, and the coffee, though bitter, helped wash down the meal. As they ate, Hannah found herself studying Hank more carefully. Despite his hard exterior and dangerous mission, there was something fundamentally decent about him. He'd risked his life to save her as a complete stranger regardless of his ulterior motives regarding Rawlins. What will you do? Hank asked as they finished eating. After this is over, I mean, will you still head to Denver? Hannah considered the question. I suppose I must. My uncle is expecting me and I have nowhere else to go, no means of support otherwise. What skills do you have, besides stitching wounds? I can teach music, like my aunt, piano mainly, though I'm passable with a violin as well. I can keep accounts, read Latin and French, and I know enough of medicine to serve as a nurse if needed. She smiled faintly. All highly marketable skills on the frontier, I'm sure. The hint of a smile touched Hank's lips. More useful than you might think. Denver's growing fast. Lots of newly wealthy mine owners wanting their children educated in the finer things. Perhaps. Hannah's smile faded, but first I need to survive this ordeal. You will, Hank said with quiet certainty. I'll make sure of it. The simple promise shouldn't have comforted her as much as it did, but Hannah found herself believing him. In the short time she'd known Hank Everett, he'd proven himself a man of his word, competent, resourceful, and determined. If anyone could get her safely to Denver, it would be him. Night fell swiftly in the mountains. Hank banked the fire to provide warmth without too much visible light, then positioned himself near the window where he could keep watch. You should sleep, Hannah told him. You've been awake for more than a day. I will, later. Don't be foolish. You need your strength, she gestured to the cot. Take it. I can stay awake and watch for a while. He raised an eyebrow. And if Rawlins and his men show up, then I wake you immediately. She moved to his side and held out her hand. Give me your revolver. I know how to use it. Hank studied her for a long moment before nodding. Fair enough. He handed her his Colt. It's loaded and the hammer's resting on an empty chamber. Just pull it back to fire. I understand. The weight of the weapon was reassuring in Hannah's hand. Get some sleep, Hank. I'll wake you in a few hours. He hesitated briefly, then moved to the cot. Wake me at any sound, any movement outside. I will. Hank stretched out on the narrow bed, his long frame barely fitting on it. Despite his obvious exhaustion, Hannah noticed he positioned himself so he could reach his rifle, which he placed alongside the cot. Within minutes, his breathing deepened and evened out. Hannah settled into the chair by the window, the revolver resting in her lap. Outside, a 3/4 moon illuminated the landscape with silvery light, casting long shadows from the scattered pines. The vastness of the wilderness struck her anew, miles of untamed country in every direction, beautiful and deadly in equal measure. Her thoughts drifted to the events that had brought her here. Just 2 days ago, she had been traveling with the Wagon train, reading a novel and chatting with her aunt about their new life in Denver. Now, Aunt Matilda was gone, along with all their possessions and Hannah's carefully planned future. Grief welled up, threatening to overwhelm her. Hannah bit her lip hard, focusing on the physical pain to keep from breaking down. There would be time for mourning later. Right now, survival had to be her priority. Hours passed with only the sounds of the night creatures and the occasional shifting of embers in the fireplace. Hannah's eyelids grew heavy, but she forced herself to stay alert, periodically moving around the small cabin to keep herself awake. She checked on Hank once, noting how much younger he looked in sleep. The hard lines of his face softened near dawn. Just as the eastern sky began to lighten, Hannah spotted movement at the edge of the trees. She froze, straining her eyes in the dim light. A deer, perhaps, or some other woodland creature? No, it was the unmistakable silhouette of a man moving stealthily through the underbrush. And he wasn't alone. Hannah's heart leapt into her throat. Moving quickly but quietly to the cot, she touched Hank's shoulder. He came awake instantly, hand already reaching for his rifle. "Someone's outside," she whispered. "At least 2 men coming from the east." Hank was on his feet in an instant, taking the revolver she offered. "Get down, away from the windows." He moved to peek through the glass, his body tense. "Damn, it's them. Rollins, him and 3 others. Hank's voice was grim. "They've found us faster than I expected." "What do we do?" Hannah asked, fear clawing at her throat. Hank was already moving, grabbing his saddlebags. "There's a root cellar under the cabin, small, but it'll hide you." He pulled up a trapdoor hidden under a ragged rug, revealing a dark space below. "Get in there and stay quiet, no matter what happens." "What about you?" "I'm going to lead them away from here." He thrust the revolver back into her hands. "Take this. If anyone but me opens that trapdoor, shoot them." "Hank, no, you can't face them alone." "I'm not planning to face them at all if I can help it." He checked his rifle, then grabbed extra ammunition from his bag. "I'll circle around, lose them in the hills, then come back for you. If I'm not back by nightfall, head south. Follow the creek bed. It'll lead you to a trading post about 15 miles downriver." Before Hannah could protest further, Hank was guiding her down into the small, earthen cellar. It smelled of damp soil and old potatoes and was barely large enough for her to crouch in. "Stay quiet," he repeated, his green eyes intense in the dim light. "I'll come back for you." Then the trapdoor closed, plunging Hannah into darkness. She heard Hank replace the rug, then his footsteps moving quickly across the cabin floor. The door opened and closed, and then silence fell. Hannah clutched the revolver with trembling hands, straining to hear any sound from above. Minutes passed like hours in the close darkness. Then came the distant crack of a rifle shot, followed by several more in quick succession. Men shouted. A horse whinnied in alarm. The skirmish seemed to move away from the cabin, the sounds growing fainter. Hannah remained frozen in her hiding place, pulse pounding in her ears. Had Hank managed to draw the outlaws away, or had they shot him and were now searching the area? More gunfire, more distant now. Then silence again. Hannah lost track of time in the darkness. Her cramped muscles screamed for relief, but she dared not move for fear of making noise. The revolver grew slippery in her sweating hands and she tightened her grip, footsteps above. Heavy boots walking across the cabin floor. Hannah's breath caught and she raised the gun toward the trapdoor. "One man or several? Friend or foe?" "Hannah," Hank's voice low and urgent. "It's me." Relief flooded through her, so intense she nearly cried out. The rug was pulled aside and the trapdoor lifted. Hank's face appeared, tense but unharmed. "Are you all right?" "Yes," she managed, her voice hoarse. "What happened?" "I heard shooting. They spotted me leaving. I managed to wound one of them and lead the others on a chase away from here." He reached down to help her up. "But they'll circle back eventually. We need to move." Hannah's legs had gone numb from crouching, and she stumbled as she climbed out of the cellar. Hank caught her, his strong hands steadying her. "Can you ride?" he asked. "Yes," she forced strength into her voice. "I can ride." "Good, I've got Gray saddled and ready." He handed her his canteen. "Drink, we've got a hard journey ahead." Hannah drank deeply, the water reviving her. Outside, the morning sun had just cleared the eastern peaks, bathing the landscape in golden light. Hank's dappled gray stood ready, saddlebags loaded and rifle secured in its scabbard. "Where are we going?" Hannah asked as Hank helped her into the saddle. "South toward the trading post I mentioned. We can get supplies there, maybe even another horse." He swung up behind her. "Hold on tight, we'll be riding hard until we're sure we've lost them." They set off at a gallop, the horse's powerful strides eating up the ground. Hannah leaned forward, gripping the saddle horn as Hank guided them along a narrow game trail that wound through dense forest. The intimacy of their shared saddle was unavoidable. Hank's chest pressed against her back, his arms around her to hold the reins. Despite their dire circumstances, Hannah found herself acutely aware of him as a man, not just as her rescuer. They rode for hours, stopping only briefly to rest the horse and drink from mountain streams. Hank remained vigilant, constantly scanning their back trail for signs of pursuit. By mid-afternoon, they had descended into a broader valley where a swift-flowing creek meandered through meadows dotted with wildflowers. "The trading post is about 5 miles downstream," Hank said as they paused at the creek's edge. "Run by a half-Shoshone man named Joseph. He's trustworthy." "Will he help us?" "For the right price, yes." Hank dismounted and helped Hannah down, "and he doesn't ask questions, which suits our needs." Hannah stretched her aching muscles, wincing at the soreness in her legs and back. 2 days of hard riding had left her body protesting, but she refused to complain. Compared to what might have befallen her with Rollins, a little physical discomfort was nothing. "You're holding up well," Hank remarked, noticing her stoic expression. "I'm tougher than I look, Mr. Everett." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "I've noticed, Miss Clarke." They continued on foot for a short distance, leading the tired horse. Hannah breathed deeply, savoring the clean mountain air scented with pine and wildflowers. Despite the danger they were in, she couldn't help appreciating the rugged beauty surrounding them. "It's magnificent country," she said softly. Hank glanced at her, something like surprise in his eyes. "Most Easterners I've met can't wait to get back to civilization. I'm not most Easterners." Hannah smiled wryly. "And I'm beginning to think civilization is a more flexible concept than I was raised to believe." He studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "You adapt quickly, that's valuable out here. Necessity is a powerful teacher." She looked up at him. "What about you?" "Where are you from originally?" "Pennsylvania. Coal mining country." Hank's voice held old memories. "My father was a miner, died in a collapse when I was 12. My mother remarried, but her new husband had no use for another man's children. My sister and I left as soon as we were able." "Is your sister in Denver now? You mentioned her earlier." "Yes, she married a shopkeeper there. They have 3 children." A rare smile softened his features. "Good kids. The oldest boy wants to be a lawman, much to his father's dismay. You're close to them, as close as my lifestyle allows." Hank shrugged. "I stop in when I can, bring presents for the children. My sister always has a place for me at her table." The simple statement held a note of longing that tugged at Hannah's heart. Despite his competence and self-sufficiency, Hank Everett was in many ways a solitary figure, a man who moved between worlds without fully belonging to any of them. They remounted and continued downstream, reaching the trading post as the sun began its descent toward the western peaks. The establishment was more substantial than Hannah had expected, a sturdy log building with a stable and corral attached, situated in a clearing near the creek. A tall, broad-shouldered man with copper skin and graying black hair stepped onto the porch as they approached. His weathered face remained impassive, but Hannah saw recognition in his dark eyes when he spotted Hank. "Everett," he said by way of greeting. "Been a while. Joseph?" Hank dismounted and helped Hannah down. "We need supplies and information." Joseph's gaze shifted to Hannah, taking in her torn dress and disheveled appearance without comment. "Come inside." The trading post's interior was well stocked with everything from traps and ammunition to bolts of fabric and sacks of coffee. A pot-bellied stove radiated warmth in the center of the room. Joseph gestured for them to sit at a small table while he fetched a pot of coffee and 3 tin cups. "Rollins' gang hit a wagon train 2 days back," Hank explained once they were seated. "Took Miss Clarke here." I managed to get her away from them, but they're hunting us. Joseph nodded, unsurprised. They stopped here yesterday, asked if I'd seen any travelers. Hannah tensed. What did you tell them? That I hadn't. Joseph's expression remained neutral, not fond of Rollins. Bad for business, the way he operates. Did they say where they were headed? Hank asked. North, toward their usual haunts, but one was wounded, shoulder shot. They needed supplies for doctoring him. Joseph sipped his coffee. They'll be back this way. Rollins was angry. Said someone had taken something that belonged to him. Hannah shuddered at the phrasing. Hank's jaw tightened visibly. We need to get to Platteville, Hank said. Miss Clarke has family waiting in Denver. Joseph considered this. Platteville's 3 days' hard ride. You'll need another horse supplies, he glanced at Hannah, and the lady could use some proper clothes. Can you provide that for a price? Joseph set down his cup. I've got a good mare you can have, gentle but strong. Some women's things my late wife left behind might fit your companion. Hank nodded. We'll take it all, plus food, ammunition, and anything else you think we'll need. While Joseph gathered the supplies, he allowed Hannah to use a small back room to wash and change. The trader's wife had been somewhat shorter than Hannah, but her clothes, a serviceable brown skirt, cream-colored blouse, and sturdy boots fit well enough after minor adjustments. Joseph even produced a comb and small hand mirror, luxuries Hannah hadn't expected. When she emerged, Hank was concluding his business with Joseph, counting out coins from a leather pouch. He looked up as she entered, and something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or appreciation. Better? Hannah asked, smoothing the unfamiliar skirt. Much, he replied simply. They departed within the hour, Hannah now mounted on a dun-colored mare with a white blaze down her nose. The animal was indeed gentle, responding readily to Hannah's commands despite her limited riding experience. Joseph stood on the porch as they prepared to leave. Rollins won't give up easily, he warned. If I were you, I'd avoid the main trails. Take the old mining road through Cedar Gap. It's rougher traveling, but less likely to be watched. Thanks, Joseph. Hank checked his rifle one last time. If anyone asks, I haven't seen a soul, the trader finished with a nod. They rode south until dusk, then made camp in a sheltered draw where a spring bubbled up from among the rocks. Hannah found herself moving with newfound confidence, helping to gather firewood and prepare their simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee. The fresh clothes and proper mount had done wonders for her morale. You're a quick study, Hank remarked as she efficiently built a small, nearly smokeless fire using techniques she'd observed him employ the previous night. I pay attention, Hannah replied, and I've always believed in being useful. They ate in companionable silence, watching the stars emerge in the deepening blue above. Despite the circumstances, Hannah found herself experiencing moments of genuine peace. The immediacy of survival had a way of clarifying what truly mattered. Tell me about Denver, she said after a while. What's it like? Hank considered the question. Growing fast, rough in parts, but there's culture, 2 theaters, churches, proper schools. Nothing like St. Louis, of course, but it's becoming a real city. And my uncle's ranch, Platteville, smaller, farming community mostly with some ranching. Decent folk, he added more coffee to his cup. Your uncle, what's his name? Thomas Clarke. He has a cattle ranch outside of town, according to my aunt's letters. I've never met him. He left for the West before I was born. Hank nodded slowly. Clarke Ranch, I know it. Good spread, about 10 miles west of Platteville. Your uncle has a solid reputation. The knowledge provided Hannah with a measure of comfort. At least she wasn't heading toward a complete unknown. We should reach Platteville in 3 days if we push hard, Hank continued. From there, it's an easy ride to your uncle's place. Hannah stared into the fire, suddenly overwhelmed by the realization that her ordeal might soon be over. And then what will you do? Continue hunting Rollins? Hank was silent for a long moment. Probably. He needs to answer for his crimes. It's dangerous going after him alone. I've managed so far. Hannah looked up, meeting his gaze across the fire. You almost died rescuing me, but I didn't. A hint of a smile touched his lips, and I'd say it was worth the risk. The simple statement warmed Hannah more than the fire before her. She'd spent most of her life being proper, predictable Hannah Clarke, the doctor's dutiful daughter, the respectable niece. No man had ever risked his life for her before. No man had ever looked at her quite the way Hank Everett did now, with a mixture of respect and something deeper that made her heart beat faster. "Thank you," she said softly, "not just for the rescue, but for everything since. You could have simply delivered me to the nearest settlement and been on your way. Maybe I've enjoyed the company." The admission hung between them, unexpectedly intimate. Hannah felt a blush warming her cheeks and was grateful for the firelight that would hide it. "We should get some rest," Hank said, breaking the moment. "I'll take first watch." "Wake me for the second," Hannah insisted. "You need sleep too." He hesitated, then nodded. "Fair enough." As Hannah settled into her bedroll, wrapped in a wool blanket Joseph had provided, she found herself watching Hank's silhouette against the starry sky. In just a few days, this man had appended everything she thought she knew about herself and her capabilities. Whatever happened next, she knew she wouldn't be the same Hannah Clarke who had boarded that wagon train in Missouri. For the first time since the attack, that thought didn't frighten her at all. The next 2 days of travel passed without incident. They followed Joseph's advice, taking the less traveled mining road that wound through cedar-studded hills and across high meadows bright with summer wildflowers. Hank remained vigilant, but as the miles between them and Rollins' territory increased, his posture gradually relaxed. Hannah discovered an unexpected enjoyment in their journey. The wild beauty of the country stirred something in her soul, a sense of freedom and possibility she'd never experienced in the drawing rooms and carefully manicured gardens of St. Louis society. She drank in the vast blue skies, the dramatic cloud formations, the ever-changing landscape with a painter's eye for detail and color. Hank noticed her fascination. "Different from what you're used to, completely," she admitted. "It's so uncontained. Magnificent in a way that makes human concerns seem very small." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's what hooked me when I first came west, the sense that I could breathe out here, away from the coal dust and crowded streets." "Is that why you stayed, even after you left the Marshal's service?" "Partly." Hank adjusted his hat against the afternoon sun. "I've tried city living since then, Denver, even San Francisco for a spell, always end up back out here." "Where you can breathe," Hannah said softly. Their eyes met briefly, a moment of shared understanding that required no words. They made camp that night in a protected hollow where a small stream provided fresh water. Their routine had become comfortable, Hank tending the horses and securing the perimeter while Hannah prepared their simple meal. Afterward, they sat by the fire, talking quietly as twilight deepened into night. "We should reach Platteville by tomorrow afternoon," Hank said, studying the map Joseph had provided. "Your uncle's ranch is here to the west." He pointed to a location marked with a small X. Hannah felt a strange reluctance at the thought of their journey ending. "I hope he'll welcome me. It's been years since my aunt corresponded with him." "Family is family out here," Hank assured her. "And an extra pair of hands is always valuable on a ranch, even hands more accustomed to piano keys than rope and reins. You've proven adaptable." His gaze held genuine respect. "And you've got courage, that counts for a lot." The compliment warmed her. "I've had a good teacher these past few days." Hank smiled, a real smile that transformed his usually serious face. "You're a quick study, Miss Clarke." The night was cool, the fire's warmth welcome as they talked. Hannah found herself sharing stories of her childhood in St. Louis, of her father's medical practice, and the hours she'd spent assisting him. Hank, in turn, spoke of his years as a marshal, the vast territories he'd covered, the people and places he'd encountered. "My sister always said I was born with wanderlust," he admitted. "Never could stay in one place too long. And yet you've remained in this region for years, hunting Rollins." Hank's expression sobered. "Some things anchor a man even against his nature." "Vengeance, justice," he corrected. "My partner had a wife, 2 young children. They never got closure." Hannah studied him in the firelight. "And when it's done, when Rollins faces justice, what then?" Hank was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. "I haven't thought that far ahead." But something in his voice suggested otherwise, that perhaps, for the first time in years, he was beginning to consider a future beyond his singular mission. They retired early, agreeing to an earlier start than usual to reach Platteville with daylight to spare. Hannah took the first watch, then woke Hank for his turn. As they exchanged places, his hand briefly covered hers in a gesture that was becoming familiar, reassuring, warm, a silent acknowledgement of their partnership. Hannah slept deeply, dreaming of vast skies and endless horizons. She woke at first light to find Hank already tending the horses, his tall figure outlined against the pale dawn sky. For a moment, she simply watched him, the competent movements, the easy way he handled the animals, the quiet strength that had become her anchor in a world turned upside down. They set out as the sun crested the eastern peaks, riding at a steady pace through increasingly cultivated landscape. By midday, they began to see scattered homesteads and fenced field signs of civilization that both reassured and disquieted Hannah. Her time in the wilderness with Hank had created a strange bubble, separate from normal life. Returning to society meant facing all she had lost, all that had changed. "Everything all right?" Hank asked, noticing her silence. "Just adjusting," Hannah replied honestly. "It feels strange, seeing people and farms after days in the wild." He nodded, understanding. "Takes time to transition back." A mile further on, they crested a rise and saw Platteville spread before them in the valley, below a modest collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street, with a white church steeple rising above the rest. Smoke curled from chimneys and tiny figures moved about the streets, going about their daily business. Hannah reined in her mare, suddenly hesitant. "It's real," she murmured. "We made it." "Did you doubt we would?" Hank asked, pulling his gray alongside her. "After what happened to the wagon train, yes, sometimes." She turned to face him fully. "Hank, I don't know how to thank you properly. You don't need to. I told you I had my reasons for going after Rollins. Not just for the rescue," Hannah insisted, "for everything since. For teaching me, for treating me as capable rather than helpless." Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a vulnerability she hadn't seen before. "You are capable, Hannah, more than most people I've met, man or woman." The use of her first name, rare from his lips, sent warmth spreading through her chest. She opened her mouth to respond when a movement on the trail behind them caught her eye. Her blood froze. "Hank," she whispered, eyes widening. "Behind us." He turned sharply, one hand already moving to his rifle. 5 riders had appeared on the ridge they'd just descended, their silhouettes clear against the sky. Even at this distance, the leader was unmistakable, a tall figure on a bay stallion. "Rollins," Hank confirmed grimly, "and all his men." "How did they find us?" "Doesn't matter now." Hank's voice was tight with controlled urgency. "Ride for town, hard as you can, don't stop for anything." "What about you?" Fear clutched at Hannah's heart. "I'll be right behind you, go." Hannah hesitated only a second before spurring her mare forward. The animal responded instantly, leaping into a gallop down the slope toward Platteville. Behind her, she heard Hank's horse following, then the more distant sound of pursuit. The wind whipped tears from her eyes as she rode, bent low over the mare's neck. The town grew larger with each pounding stride, but Hannah knew the Outlaws' fresher horses might overtake them before they reached safety. A gunshot cracked behind her, then another. She didn't dare look back, focusing only on the road ahead, urging her tiring mount to greater speed. The mare was gallant, giving everything she had, but Hannah could feel her beginning to flag. Another shot, closer this time. A bullet whizzed past her ear, and Hannah couldn't suppress a cry of fear. "Keep going," Hank shouted from somewhere behind. Almost there, the town's outskirts were just ahead, a scattering of outlying buildings, then the main street. Hannah burst past the first structures, people turning to stare at the woman riding hell bent through their town. She opened her mouth to shout a warning but had no breath to spare. More gunfire erupted behind her. A man on the boardwalk yelled in alarm, diving for cover. Others scattered or reached for weapons of their own. Hannah kept riding, only slowing when she reached the heart of town, her mare heaving beneath her. She turned in the saddle, frantically searching for Hank. He appeared moments later, his gray horse lathered with sweat, his face set in grim lines. Behind him, the outlaws had pulled up at the edge of town, apparently unwilling to continue their pursuit into more populated territory. "They won't give up," Hank said as he reached her, "just regrouping." Hannah followed his gaze. The 5 outlaws sat their horses just beyond the town limits, Rollins clearly visible in the lead, his face a mask of fury even at this distance. "What do we do?" Hannah asked, struggling to control her panicked breathing. "Find the sheriff," Hank decided. If this town has one worth his salt, Rollins might think twice about coming in with guns blazing. They rode toward a building marked with a weathered sign, "Sheriff's Office." As they approached, the door opened and a man stepped out, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, wearing a tarnished star on his vest. His keen eyes took in the situation at a glance. "Trouble?" he asked simply. "Jack Rollins and his gang," Hank replied, dismounting. "They've been pursuing us for days." The sheriff's bushy eyebrows rose. "Rollins, here." He squinted toward the town's edge where the outlaws remained, bold even for him. "They attacked a wagon train 3 days back," Hank explained. "Killed several people and took Miss Clarke here captive. I managed to get her away from them." "And they've been hunting you since?" It wasn't a question. The sheriff's weathered face hardened. "I'm Sheriff Bennett, been waiting for a chance to put Rollins behind bars for years." "You'll need help," Hank warned. "There are 5 of them, all armed and desperate." Bennett nodded toward the saloon across the street, where several men had emerged to watch the unfolding situation. "This is a law-abiding town, Mr. Everett." Hank Everett, recognition flickered in the sheriff's eyes. "The former marshal, heard about you, good reputation." "Appreciate that, Sheriff." Bennett turned his attention to Hannah. "Miss, you'd best get inside where it's safer. My deputy's wife runs the boarding house next door. She'll look after you." Hannah shook her head firmly. "With all due respect, Sheriff, I've come too far to hide now." The older man studied her for a moment, then nodded. "Your choice, but stay out of the line of fire." He turned back to Hank. "What's your assessment, Everett? Will they come in shooting?" "Rollins wants the woman, and he wants me dead." Hank's voice was matter-of-fact. "If he thinks he can get either, he'll risk it." Even as they spoke, the situation at the edge of town was changing. Rollins and his men had dismounted and were conferring, occasionally gesturing toward the town center where Hannah, Hank, and the sheriff stood. "They're planning something," Bennett muttered. He raised his voice, addressing the gathering townspeople. "Anyone who can handle a gun, get ready. The rest of you, clear the streets." Several men nodded grimly, disappearing into buildings only to return moments later with rifles and shotguns. Bennett's deputy, a young man with a nervous demeanor but determined expression, distributed additional weapons from the sheriff's office. "Miss Clarke," Hank said quietly, "you really should find shelter." Hannah turned to him, her chin raised. "I told you I'm not hiding." "This isn't about your courage, which I don't doubt," he replied, his green eyes intent. "But Rollins wants you. As long as you're visible, you're giving him a target to aim for." She hesitated, seeing the logic in his words. "Where then?" "The sheriff's office." "You'll be protected but out of sight." Bennett nodded agreement. "Smart thinking. Through that door, miss." Hannah reluctantly complied but paused at the doorway. "Hank," he turned to her, his expression softening slightly. Yes, words failed her. How could she express all she wanted to say when bullets might start flying at any moment? "Be careful," she finally managed. "Always am." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Inside the sheriff's office, Hannah positioned herself near a window where she could see what was happening in the street. The outlaws had begun moving into town, spreading out as they advanced. Rollins himself strode boldly down the center of the main street, his scarred face twisted with malice. "Everett," he shouted when he was within earshot, "send out the woman and I might let you live." Hank stepped forward, rifle held ready but not aimed. "Not going to happen, Rollins. You're outnumbered here," Rollins laughed harshly. "Quality over quantity, Marshal. My boys are killers, not farmers playing at being tough." "Former Marshal," Hank corrected evenly. "And these men look plenty tough to me." The townsfolk had indeed positioned themselves strategically on rooftops, in doorways, behind water troughs and barrels. Sheriff Bennett stood openly beside Hank, his own rifle held with the easy confidence of a man who knew how to use it. "Last chance," Rollins called. "The woman or we start shooting, lot of innocent folk might get hurt." "The woman is under my protection," Bennett replied, "as is this town. Turn around and ride out while you still can, Rollins." The outlaw leader's face darkened with rage. "You're making a mistake, old man. Only mistake here is yours, coming into my town looking for trouble." Bennett's voice carried clear authority. "There are warrants out for all of you. I'm offering you one chance to leave without bloodshed." For a moment, it seemed Rollins might reconsider. His gaze swept the street, taking in the armed townspeople, calculating the odds. Then his eyes settled on the sheriff's office window where Hannah stood watching. "There she is," he shouted. "Get her." Everything happened at once. Rollins drew his pistol with lightning speed, firing at Bennett. The sheriff staggered but remained standing, returning fire as he sought cover. Hank dropped to one knee, his rifle cracking as he took aim at one of the outlaws trying to flank them. Gunfire erupted throughout the street as the townsmen engaged the remaining gang members. Windows shattered, bullets splintered wood, and shouts filled the air. Hannah ducked below the windowsill, heart pounding through the chaos. She saw Rollins break away from the main confrontation, heading directly for the sheriff's office. Panic seized her. The outlaw leader was coming for her, and no one had noticed his movement amid the firefight. Hannah looked frantically around the office for a weapon. Her gaze fell on a shotgun mounted on the wall. She grabbed it, checking quickly to confirm it was loaded. It was heavy and unwieldy in her hands, but she remembered the basic handling her aunt had taught her. The door burst open, and Rollins stood there, blood streaming from a graze on his temple, his eyes wild with fury and desperation. "You've caused me a lot of trouble, woman," he snarled, pistol aimed at her chest. Hannah raised the shotgun, hands trembling but grip firm. "Stay back," Rollins laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. "You won't pull that trigger, city women never do." "I'm not the same woman you took from that wagon train," Hannah replied, surprised at the steadiness in her voice. "I've changed." Something in her tone must have convinced him. Rollins' expression faltered for an instant, uncertainty replacing confidence. In that moment of hesitation, a shadow appeared in the doorway behind him. "Drop it, Rollins," Hank ordered, his revolver pressed to the back of the outlaw's head. "It's over." Rollins froze, his eyes never leaving Hannah. "You think I care if I die? I'll take her with me." "No, you won't," Hannah said calmly, adjusting her aim, "because either he'll kill you or I will." The standoff stretched for one heartbeat, 2, 3. Then, with a movement so swift Hannah barely registered it, Rollins spun toward Hank, firing as he turned. Hank's revolver roared simultaneously. Rollins staggered, a look of surprise crossing his face before he crumpled to the floor. Hank remained standing, though Hannah saw him wince and press a hand to his side where blood was beginning to seep through his shirt. "Hank." She cried, dropping the shotgun and rushing to his side. "I'm all right," he grimaced. "Just grazed me." Sheriff Bennett appeared in the doorway, his left arm hanging limp but otherwise intact. He took in the scene, Rollins' body on the floor, Hank bleeding but upright, Hannah supporting him with one arm around his waist. "It's done," Bennett said simply. "The others are either dead or surrendered." Hank nodded, his face pale but composed. "Good." "Let me see that wound," Hannah insisted, already guiding Hank to a chair. "Sheriff, do you have medical supplies in the cabinet there?" Bennett gestured with his good arm. "I'll send for the doctor." "I can manage until he arrives," Hannah said, her mind shifting into the familiar patterns her father had taught her. "I'll need clean water, bandages, and whiskey if you have it." While Bennett gathered the requested items, Hannah carefully helped Hank remove his blood-stained shirt. The bullet had carved a furrow across his ribs, painful but not life-threatening if properly cleaned and bandaged. "You're lucky," she told him as she began washing the wound. "An inch to the left and we'd be having a very different conversation." "Been lucky since the day I found you," Hank replied, his green eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. Hannah's hands stilled on his skin. "I think I'm the lucky one." Outside, the commotion was dying down as the townspeople secured the surviving outlaws and tended to the wounded. Inside the sheriff's office, a different kind of tension filled the air, one built of unspoken feelings and possibilities neither had dared acknowledge until now. "Hannah," Hank began, then winced as she applied whiskey to the wound. "Hold still," she admonished gently. "Whatever you want to say can wait until you're not bleeding." He caught her hand in his. "No, it can't." His voice was low, urgent. "We've both nearly died too many times these past few days to waste more time not speaking the truth." Hannah's heart hammered against her ribs. "And what truth is that?" "That's somewhere between rescuing you and being rescued by you in return. I realized I can't imagine going back to my life as it was before." Hank's grip tightened slightly. "I've spent 3 years focused on vengeance justice, I called it. But the moment Rollins lay dead at my feet, all I could think about was whether you were safe." "Hank, let me finish." His green eyes held her steadily. "I know we've only known each other a short time. I know your life has been turned upside down and you're still grieving. I'm not asking for anything right now except a chance. A chance to see if what I'm feeling, what I think we're both feeling, is real." Hannah's vision blurred with unexpected tears. "And if it is real, what then? You said yourself you've never been able to stay in one place." "Maybe I just never had a reason to stay before." His hand moved to gently brush a tear from her cheek. "I can't promise I'll ever be completely tamed, Hannah, but I can promise to always find my way back to you if you'll have me." The words, so honest and unadorned, struck a chord deep within her. In Hank Everett, Hannah recognized a kindred spirit, someone who understood both her strength and her vulnerability, who saw her clearly and valued what he saw. "I think," she said carefully, "that I would very much like to explore those possibilities." A rare, full smile transformed Hank's face, making him appear younger, unburdened. "Then we'll take it one day at a time." Sheriff Bennett cleared his throat from the doorway, reminding them they weren't alone. "Doctor's coming," he announced. "And there's a gentleman here asking for Miss Clarke. Says he's her uncle." Hannah turned in surprise. A tall, gray-haired man stepped into the office, his weathered face showing clear family resemblance to Hannah's late father. "Hannah," he asked hesitantly. "Hannah Clarke, Uncle Thomas?" Hannah rose, emotions welling anew. "How did you know I was here?" "Word spreads fast in a small town," Thomas Clarke replied, his voice gruff with emotion. "Someone rode out to the ranch saying there'd been a shootout in town and a young woman named Clarke was involved. I came as quick as I could." He glanced at Hank, noting his injury and state of undress with raised eyebrows. "And you are, sir?" "Hank Everett," Hank replied, extending his hand. "I had the honor of helping your niece when her wagon train was attacked." Thomas shook the offered hand firmly. "Then I'm in your debt, Mr. Everett. My brother's only child is precious to me, even though we've never met until now." In the days that followed, Hannah settled into life at the Clarke Ranch with surprising ease. The sprawling property west of Platteville was everything her aunt's letters had described: a well-run cattle operation with a comfortable main house, several outbuildings, and a handful of loyal ranch hands who had worked for Thomas Clarke for years. Her uncle, a widower with no children of his own, welcomed Hannah warmly, giving her the bedroom that had once belonged to his late wife. He listened with grave attention to the full account of the wagon train attack, Hank's rescue, and their subsequent journey. "Your Aunt Matilda was a remarkable woman," he said when Hannah described her death. "I regret we lost touch over the years. Family should stick together." "She spoke highly of you," Hannah assured him. "She was looking forward to our new start here." Thomas's weathered face softened. "Well, you've got a home here for as long as you want it, child. This place will be yours someday anyway, might as well learn how to run it." The offer touched Hannah deeply. After days of uncertainty and danger, having a place to belong meant more than she could express. Hank recovered quickly from his wound, staying in Platteville at the boarding house while he regained his strength. He visited the ranch daily, often riding out with Thomas to learn about the operation. Hannah watched their growing friendship with quiet pleasure, noting how her uncle's initial wariness had transformed into genuine respect. 3 weeks after their arrival in Platteville, Hank and Hannah rode together to a high meadow overlooking the ranch. Wildflowers carpeted the ground in a riot of color, and the distant peaks gleamed white with early autumn snow. They dismounted near a solitary pine tree, spreading a blanket for an impromptu picnic. "Your uncle offered me a job today," Hank said as they shared bread, cheese, and apples. "As his foreman." Hannah tried to contain her surprise. "And what did you say?" "I told him I'd think about it." Hank's eyes held a question. "What would you think about that, Hannah, me staying here working on the ranch?" "I'd think my uncle is a very wise man," she replied carefully. "But I'd also wonder if it would be enough for you. You've been a wanderer for so long." Hank reached across the blanket to take her hand. "I told you before I just needed a reason to stay somewhere. I think I've found that reason." Hannah's heart quickened. "Have you?" "I have." He shifted closer, his fingers intertwining with hers. "These past weeks, getting to know you properly without danger hanging over our heads, they've been the happiest of my life." "Mine too," Hannah admitted softly. "I know it's still soon," Hank continued. "And I'm willing to wait as long as you need. But I want you to know my intentions, Hannah Clarke. I love you, and if you'll have me, I want to spend my life with you." The simple declaration, spoken against the backdrop of endless sky and rolling grasslands, filled Hannah's heart to overflowing. In the weeks since their arrival, their connection had only deepened, evolving from the intense bond forged in danger to something richer and more enduring. "I love you too," she whispered, the words coming easily, naturally. "And I don't want to wait. Life is too uncertain, too precious to waste a moment of happiness we could have together." Hank's smile was radiant as he drew her into his arms. Their first kiss was gentle, then deepening with a passion that had been building since that first night in the line shack. When they finally parted, both breathless, Hank pressed his forehead to hers. "Your uncle mentioned the preacher comes through town next Sunday," he murmured. "Think that's enough time to prepare a wedding?" Hannah laughed, joy bubbling up from deep within. "More than enough." They were married the following Sunday in Platteville's white-steepled church, with Thomas Clarke giving away the bride and Sheriff Bennett serving as best man. Hannah wore a simple cream-colored dress ordered from Denver, with wildflowers in her hair instead of a veil. Hank, clean-shaven and solemn in a new black suit, watched her walk down the aisle with wonder in his eyes. "Never thought I'd see the day," Bennett remarked during the small reception afterward. Hank Everett, settling down with a wife and a steady job. "Neither did I," Hank admitted, his gaze finding Hannah across the room where she chatted with the doctor's wife. "But then again, I never expected to find someone like her." "She's a remarkable woman," the sheriff agreed, stood her ground against Rollins without flinching. "You two are well matched." Thomas Clarke approached, clapping Hank on the shoulder. "Welcome to the family, son. I meant what I said about the foreman position, but I'm thinking longer term now. This ranch needs an heir, someone to take over when these old bones can't work anymore." "Someone who knows cattle and land," Hank nodded, understanding the implicit offer. "I still have a lot to learn about ranching." "You're a quick study," Thomas replied, echoing Hannah's words from their journey, "and you've got the right instincts. The rest will come with time." They settled into married life at the ranch, living in a small but comfortable cabin Thomas had built for his foreman years earlier. Hank took to ranching with the same determination and skill he'd shown as a lawman and scout, while Hannah divided her time between helping with the ranch books and establishing a small school for the children of nearby homesteads. Letters came from Hank's sister in Denver, expressing delight at his marriage and promising a visit come spring. Hannah wrote to her father's old colleagues in St. Louis, informing them of her new life and requesting medical texts she could use to serve as the area's unofficial nurse until a proper doctor established practice in Platteville. Winter came to the Colorado Plains harsh but beautiful, with snow blanketing the land and nights spent by the fire in their snug cabin. Hank occasionally disappeared for days tracking strayed cattle or riding the ranch's boundaries, but he always returned to Hannah with the same wonder in his eyes, as if he couldn't quite believe his good fortune. "Still glad you married a former wanderer?" he asked one night as they lay together in the darkness, wind howling outside their sturdy walls, Hannah curled against his side, secure in his embrace. "More than ever." You bring the world to me, Hank, all your stories, all the places you've seen, and I like to think I give you a home to return to. You give me far more than that, he murmured, kissing her forehead. You give me purpose. Spring arrived with its promise of renewal. The ranch flourished under Thomas and Hank's joint management, with Hannah's careful bookkeeping showing healthy profits despite a harsh winter. As the meadows greened and calves were born, Hannah herself bloomed with news of her own. A baby, Hank repeated when she told him, his expression a mixture of joy and trepidation. Are you certain? The doctor in Denver confirmed it when I visited your sister last month, Hannah replied, taking his hands in hers. We'll welcome our child before winter returns. Hank gathered her close, his happiness palpable. I never thought I'd have this, he confessed, voice rough with emotion. A home, a family, a future worth building, because of a chance meeting, Hannah mused. Because you were brave enough to ride alone against 5 outlaws. Best decision I ever made, he kissed her tenderly. Though marrying you tops the list. Their son was born as autumn painted the countryside in gold and crimson. They named him Matthew Thomas Everett, honoring both Hannah's father and her uncle. The baby had Hank's green eyes and Hannah's fair hair, and from his first lusty cry it was clear he had inherited both parents' determination. He's perfect, Hank whispered, holding his son for the first time, awe suffusing his weathered features. Hannah watched them together, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. From the terror of the wagon train attack to this moment of pure joy, the journey had been unexpected, dangerous, and ultimately more rewarding than she could have imagined. Thomas Clarke became grandpa to young Matthew, doting on the boy and teaching him about ranch life from the moment he could toddle after the older man. The Clarke Ranch thrived, expanding under Hank's innovative management and becoming one of the most successful operations in the region. 2 years after Matthew's birth, Hannah gave birth to a daughter they named Matilda Rose, in honor of the aunt who had brought Hannah west. The little girl had Hannah's delicate features but Hank's adventurous spirit, keeping her parents constantly on their toes. Life wasn't always easy. Droughts, harsh winters, cattle sickness all tested the family's resilience. Hank occasionally struggled with restlessness, disappearing on solitary rides when the walls seemed to close in on him. But he always returned, his love for Hannah and their children stronger than any wanderlust. Hannah found her own fulfillment in the life they'd built. Her small school grew into a proper schoolhouse in Platteville, where she taught 3 days a week. Her medical knowledge made her a valued resource in the community, particularly for women's complaints that many found difficult to discuss with male doctors. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Hank took Hannah back to the high meadow where he'd first proposed. They spread a blanket beneath the same pine tree, now watching their children play among the wildflowers while they enjoyed a picnic lunch. Happy? Hank asked, observing her contented expression. Hannah smiled, leaning against his shoulder. Completely, you, more than I ever thought possible. He wrapped an arm around her waist. Sometimes I still can't believe how much my life changed because of that wagon train attack. Terrible as it was, it brought you to me. We found each other, Hannah corrected gently, and we've been finding each other ever since in new ways every day. Hank's kiss was tender, a reaffirmation of the love that had begun in danger and blossomed in peace. Nearby, Matthew's laughter rang out as he chased butterflies, Matilda toddling after her brother with determined steps. They'll grow up strong here, Hank murmured, watching their children. Free. Knowing who they are and where they belong. With occasional wanderlust inherited from their father, Hannah teased, and courage from their mother, he countered with a smile. They'll forge their own paths, but they'll always know the way home. As the sun began its descent toward the western peaks, painting the landscape in golden light, Hannah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the city-bred doctor's daughter to frontier wife and mother, she had transformed in ways she could never have predicted. The woman who had been torn from a wagon train by outlaws bore little resemblance to the woman she was now stronger, more resilient, deeply rooted in the land and the love she had found here. Beside her, Hank Everett had undergone his own transformation from solitary avenger to devoted husband, father, and rancher. The restlessness that had driven him for so long had found its balance in the stability of family and purpose. "No regrets?" he asked softly, as if reading her thoughts. Hannah turned to him, her blue eyes clear and certain. "Not one. Every step of our journey brought us here together. I wouldn't change a moment of it." Their lips met as the setting sun bathed the high meadow in amber light, their children's laughter a sweet counterpoint to the eternal whisper of the prairie wind. Two lives, once separate and uncertain, now irrevocably intertwined in a love story that had begun in danger but would continue in joy for all the days to come.